He's used to flying high as the lead singer of U2.
It's a beautiful day.
For almost 2,000 years, this has been a place where Christian faith and history meet. Now science is here, confirming what so many believe. Science and the scriptures, often at odds, in agreement tonight, with many questions still to answer.
Lauer now joins the ranks of disgraced media giants. Charlie Rose, Fox News CEO Roger Ailes, commentator and former Fox host Bill O'Reilly, Harvey Weinstein, and former MSNBC contributor Mark Halperin.
Growing controversy surrounding broadcaster and journalist Charlie Rose.
Little did he know that his own reporting would soon seem like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
You were probably the last guy in the world that they wanted to fire because you were the guy that the ratings and the revenues were built on. You carried that network on your shoulders for a lot of years.
But now he joins a different list. Media giants to fall from grace in a story now all too familiar.
I found a surprisingly helpful summary of this by Bono, the lead singer of U2. In an interview, he said this: "You see, at the center of all religions is the idea of karma. You know, what you put out comes back to you. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And yet along comes this idea called grace, to upend all that as you reap, so will you sow stuff. Grace defies reason and logic. Love interrupts, if you like, the consequences of your actions, which in my case is very good news indeed, because I've done a lot of stupid stuff before the watershed." I'd be in big trouble if karma was going to finally be my judge. It doesn't excuse my mistakes, but I'm holding out for grace.
I believe it's just truth. We all have it imprinted on our hearts, right? And we know when we are in the presence of capital T truth. We can sometimes, be duped, and it's very hard to convince people that they have been duped. It's a lot easier just to dupe them. But I believe that there is always going to be a hunger and thirst for, philosophy, so to speak, for this love of wisdom, capital W wisdom, godly wisdom in our case, if we can speak frankly. And it's going to lead people to seek the truth.
What I really want my students to do is aspire to learn and to seek truth.
A law professor has a message for millennials: think, don't feel.
My whole objective here is to get them to think critically about these questions, to develop an appetite for the truth, and to really learn how to pursue the truth on their own. And so I don't want them to fall back on labels as a crutch or as a way of avoiding what really should be a tremendous opportunity to think alongside great thinkers about really interesting things.
Amazon is bridging the gap between religions with its newest holiday ad.
This one really does speak to what's going on maybe in our country, maybe how some people are feeling these days.
Yeah, well, it's just celebrating diversity. More and more companies are sharing a message of tolerance. Take a look at this. Working together, being together. And I'm starting to notice this in commercials. So I bring this to the table today. I wanted to discuss it with you guys. What do you think?
Arguments consist of propositions and facts, or in other words, reasons. And reasons don't always care about how we feel about them. Reasons are what they are.
Right.
Often you actually need to set aside your feelings. And it's not that feelings aren't important, but we really need our first instinct to be to reach for reasoned arguments.
Just last week, hosting the annual Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, known for his travels around the world.
Where in the world is Matt Lauer?
And his contentious interviews, like this one with Tom Cruise back in 2005.
Aren't there examples where it works?
Matt, you don't even, you're glib.
In a state of shock.
I see the anguish on my colleagues' faces. Is the pain on the faces of those who found the courage to come forward?
But it is unavoidable. Everywhere you look, you find hurting people.
Many millennials try to find reason within themselves instead.
I'm not always certain that there's necessarily a God, but sometimes I do find myself praying if there is a higher being up there, help me out.
Take 20-year-old Stephen, for example, who's struggling with his belief in God after mass shootings, recent hurricanes, and terrorist attacks.
Other times it's you look at the world, you look at a lot of problems and a lot of things, and you're like, would a God really let all this happen?
The thing is, it's not like we exalt our suffering. It's we find meaning in our suffering, and there is nothing worse than witnessing hopeless grief.
Grief is still wrong.
Hopeless grief is where we are, frankly, as a society.
There's tragedy after tragedy on the news, and actually surrounded by people suffering as well. Isn't that right? Friends who are struggling emotionally or mentally or physically. There is so much pain. And it raises huge questions.
That's the thing. It's so, after Vatican II, everything's like fractured and splintered. You know, I heard, I don't know the exact number, there's something like 40,000 denominations for Christianity now. How would you even know where to go if there are so many? So that's the thing, it's the kind of divide and conquer method they've been using. So everything's so confused, they spend most of the time arguing about what is right, and then they don't see the enemies coming in and infiltrating because they're arguing over who's right.
Brilliant marketing. Okay, so you may have seen these two commercials. The one we're watching now is an Amazon commercial with a priest and an imam, and they meet for tea.
Many people are applauding the commercial for showing that we can put aside our differences. It's wonderful. You kind of wait to see, okay, where's this going?
It begins with a priest and an imam sitting down and laughing and sharing a cup of tea together. And as they get up, they clutch at their aching knees because they're both men of prayer, you see. And the next day, this is where Amazon Prime comes in, they both open the door and find a parcel. And they both open it up, and it turns out they've sent one another the same thing, a sporty knee brace. It presents a beautiful picture of the world where religious and ethnic disputes are transcended with laughter and cups of tea. And it's a beautiful picture of the world that's spoiled by exclusive truth statements around religion. Spoiled if one of the people in the priest and imam scenario were to say, "You're wrong, you're wrong." Of course, many people are sincere in their beliefs, but you can be sincerely wrong. Or let's go to the elephant story. And I suppose, again, that the problems are pretty obvious. If you really believe that all these poor different religions are blind, and that they need someone who can put all the bits together, then you're claiming to be the one who can see. You're claiming to be the one who sees the whole elephant, saying that all religions are basically the same. When we look at that closer, it's not loving. It's not humble. No one's ever seen God, so we don't get to say that. In 2015, you probably saw it, Stephen Fry was on Irish TV, and he was asked what he'd say to God, and I quote, "I'd say, bone cancer in children. What's that about? How dare you? How dare you create a world in which there's so much misery that is not our fault? The moment you banish him," that's God, "life becomes simpler, cleaner, purer, more worth living, in my opinion." As an atheist, that logic sounded really compelling. But now I think over that question, there's actually a huge flaw here. You see, that logic assumes that any possible reason for suffering out there will be something that we immediately understand. And at this point, you might hear me say that and think, well, look, what possible reason could God have to allow suffering? That's kind of the point. See, as human beings, our perspective is finite and profoundly limited. And if we dismiss that possibility out of hand, then we are in danger of some really shallow thinking. The kind of thinking that says, if I can't understand or imagine it, then it can't exist.
I believe that we are at this point in our society where, just before a tsunami, just before the big wave comes, everything will recede back, and all of a sudden you see all the crap on the beach. You see all the garbage. That's where I feel we are now. And people are just starting to see, oh God, we've been lied to. Oh God, that's not working. Feminism is crap. You know what I mean? All this stuff, it's all there. But that's just before the wave comes.
But rather that suffering in our world is a clear sign to us that things aren't right. I'll quote C.S. Lewis again. He wrote, "God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks to us in our conscience, but shouts to us in our pain. It's his megaphone to rouse a deaf world."
And I don't feel that Matt has betrayed us. I texted him this morning and said, I adore you. And no person is perfect in this world. Nobody is. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God.
Are we prepared to acknowledge how much suffering is human in origin? Even many of the natural disasters we see actually have human exploitation, wastefulness, and greed lurking at the bottom of them.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Reality Check, the world in 2017.
Are we prepared to acknowledge that we have a hand in the suffering of others? That we've played our part in hurting them? We often look at the world and the suffering, we say, how could God allow that to exist?
Extreme weather, major natural disasters, forced migration, massive data theft, and large terrorist attacks. I guess these risks were clearly manifested by the events that followed.
So the real question becomes, how could God allow me to exist? It wasn't meant to be this way. Suffering shows us that something has gone very wrong.
The world this year unfortunately witnessed a number of natural disasters, floods, earthquakes, and hurricanes, some of which were the deadliest on record. These misfortunes, in addition to the conflicts and wars, resulted in an unprecedented level of displaced people around the world.
But I do believe that God created us with an appetite, a hunger, and thirst for order. So it's no bloody wonder that when the world has devolved into chaos, that there is now a resurgence. And so, you see some people kind of LARPing towards, fashy tendencies, etc. We have the perfect code, and it is natural law.
Well, let me quote someone who puts it extremely honestly. Writing in River Out of Eden, Professor Richard Dawkins puts it like this. In a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect, if there is at bottom. No design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. And in that meaningless universe, in what way can you say that suffering is really a problem? In what way can you say that it's really wrong? You see, when we encounter suffering, our instinct is to say, it shouldn't be this way. To say, that's wrong. But if we dismiss God, who's to say what should or shouldn't be the case? Who's to say what's right, what's wrong? Those things become no more than opinion.
You also put some ground rules in place. Here's one. If you use an ISM, ism, or ist, you cannot continue speaking. What do you mean?
Well, what I'm reacting to there is the use of labels like racism or materialism or other labels that really foreclose thought. So labels can be helpful in classroom conversations if we know what we're talking about. What I object to is the use of labels to end the conversation and to avoid thinking critically about important questions.
We need this elephant to speak. And until he comes down from the mountain, until the elephant speaks, your guess is as good as mine. In fact, until that happens, we might be treating God much worse than we'd ever want to be treated ourselves. I don't know about you, but I hate being labeled by others. I hate being described by others without my input. Why would we think that was okay to do to God?
But we have been brainwashed to believe the opposite, and this is the business of chaos versus order. It's what's natural versus what's unnatural, and we've been told to reject within us very natural sentiments: love of family, love of country, and love of one's own. Those are all very, very natural feelings that everyone indeed has a right to them, and should do everything to, frankly, cultivate that, in the here and now. And freedom. God, as you mentioned, does not put in the stars, believe in me by the way I exist. He loves his children so much, he gives us freedom.
But it comes down to what God made human beings for. He didn't make us to be robots that he programmed unthinkingly. He made us to be people who loved him and were loved by him genuinely. And for that love to be real love, it had to include the possibility of rejection. The freedom for us to choose not to to love God. If you've ever loved someone, you'll know that love is dangerous like that. It leaves you vulnerable. And because God created a universe with the possibility of real love, that was always an option.
Why is it that in your opinion, that they hate the dominant culture hates Christianity? Like this Texas massacre, this horrible Texas massacre. It was an atheist that shot up Christians. So, you can regard this as a hate crime towards Christians. But the second that came out, the media didn't want to talk about it anymore. But just in general, I see this extreme hatred towards Christians just as a whole.
This year was the most dangerous year for churchgoers in America. And again, there's no connection. An atheist shoots up a Christian church where we're like, I have no idea how this happened. Mm-hmm. Anyone shoots up a mosque, guess what happens? It's Islamophobia. Right. It's a very, very simple question, answer to your question, Britt. Why the hatred? And I'm going to talk to the Christians in your audience here. It's very, very simple, because our fight is not against flesh and blood, but against powers and dominions. It is a spiritual war.
The writer C.S. Lewis was an atheist who became a Christian, and facing up to suffering was actually part of his journey to faith, not away from it. He put it like this: "My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust?" Let me sketch that for you. 3 years in the public eye, no more. 12 haphazard and incompetent followers. No money to spend, no armies to lead. And at the end of it all, pièce de résistance, crucifixion in a public, brutal and humiliating way. Given those ingredients and nothing more, this homeless carpenter's son has changed the world. 2 billion people call him God. That's worth looking at, isn't it?
And I don't think you're let off easily by saying a great thinker or a great philosopher, or because actually he went round saying he was the Messiah. That's why he was crucified. He was crucified because he said he was the Son of God. So he either, in my view, was the Son of God, or he was
not.
No, nuts.
Yes.
Forget rock and roll messianic complexes. This is like, Charlie Manson type delirium. And I find it hard to accept that all the millions and millions of lives, half the earth for 2,000 years, have been touched, have felt their lives touched and inspired by some nutter.
Here's the fourth thing Jesus says to our suffering world: I choose to suffer for you. Jesus ended his life on a cruel Roman cross, facing all the ugliness of human nature. Betrayed, tortured, murdered. But it wasn't a surprise to him. In fact, it seemed to have been his plan all along. He was constantly saying that this was his goal. By dying this kind of death that only the worst criminals deserve to die, Jesus claimed that he would be dealing with the root problem of all suffering. Not just the symptoms, but the cause. You see, he claimed to be God, come in person, to pay the price for our rejection of him. Jesus came to suffer so that he could end suffering. Not your own hard work, not your own religiosity, not your own effort, but a unique offer: grace.